Hello, everybody, and welcome to our channel at No Violence for Kids Canada. Here we are again for our weekly live chat about parents and breaking cycles. Our topic tonight is righteousness. We're going to talk and answer a few questions about what it means to be a righteous parent. And I'm super excited to be here today on the beautiful lands of the Kwantlen Nation, who have been guardians of this land for time immemorial. And I'm really grateful for that. And I believe in their truth. And because of that, I take my commitment to reconciliation very seriously. As a Canadian, I work hard in my spare time, many hours a week, and co-founded No Violence for Kids Canada. And we are working hard to build a movement to get an answer for call to action number 6, which is to repeal Section 43 of the Criminal Code of Canada and end legal violent discipline against children. There's over 65 other countries in the world that have already taken this step, and we hope that Canada will be next this year. So please join us in these weekly conversations and like our posts. You can join us on Facebook, No Violence for Kids Canada, and we're going to be here every Thursday just starting conversations about decolonizing discipline in any way we can. And every week lately, I've been joined by a really, really great colleague and peer and inspiration, Andrea.
Hello, YouTube land. I would like to acknowledge the land that I'm on. I'm in Toronto, and it's a traditional territory of many nations, not unlike the multicultural city in which I live. And those nations include the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. And I apologize profusely if I'm not saying this correctly. But I am grateful to be working and living on this land. And I also take reconciliation and this repeal very seriously.
We are doing these things. We should also mention next Monday is Family Day, Andrea.
Next Monday is Family Day, but I'm going to do it on Sunday.
Are you doing it on Sunday?
I'm doing it on Sunday. Yeah, on Monday I have to hit to Belleville for family fun.
Okay.
But on Sunday, February 19th, as a part of Family Day weekend, I will be hitting the streets of downtown Toronto to get petition signatures to repeal Section 43 of our criminal code. So
I'm so excited that you're doing that. I'm going to be out in Vancouver. I've got a sign. I'm going to put a big sign over my body and maybe stand around the art gallery like that person. And I love that you made like that scan code so people can just scan my sign and get right over to Mark Levasseur's petition. It's an actual official House of Commons petition. I saw we have over, he and his people have over 700 signatures already. So we want to support everything we do for Mark and his story and get this repeal going. So Monday, I'll be out in Vancouver. Find me. I'll be around the art gallery. Andrea, on Sunday, somewhere around the streets of Toronto. Where are you thinking, Andrea?
I'm thinking I might just go right DT, Dundas Square, Yonge and Dundas.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to be at Yonge and Dundas. I don't know Toronto, but that sounds pretty central.
It's the Times Square of Toronto.
Is it? Okay. I'm going to be like at Robson and Georgia area. So that the art gallery is that whole big block. So I'll just kind of walk around the art gallery. Hopefully other people will join me. So if you're in Vancouver and you want to join me and wear a sign and go for a walk, get to know each other, I'd love to make new friends.
Absolutely. And if you're in Toronto and you want to join me, I'm actually going to print a bunch of little flyers. One I will be wearing and one that I will be handing out to people so they can just take it and scan it on the go if they don't want to take a minute to look at my sign.
That's great. Well, maybe next week, beginning of our chat, we can tell everybody how it goes, and we'll check in to see how many signatures we get signed. So you ready to get started on our quick little parenting chat today?
Absolutely.
Okay, we're talking about a heavy topic. We're talking about righteousness, Andrea. Righteousness. Why did we even thinking about this? Like, how did we end up on this word?
You know, I think Amy last week was sort of the forerunner in deciding on this topic.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Amy out there. That's Amy Vaughn from North Vancouver. And she also volunteers with No Violence for Kids Canada and puts in lots of effort to get this repeal going and obviously has a lot of great ideas. So Amy is not with us tonight, but she's with us in spirit, and this is her fantastic idea. So let's try and do this justice. Literally. Okay. Here we go. Question number one. Andrea, how do you
Yes.
define righteousness?
How do I define righteousness? Um, for me, righteousness is just about being sort of morally right, being morally right, being justifiable. And to me, when I think about righteousness and morals, I think of sort of an almost an external set of rules and guide that says sort of definitively this is right and this is wrong. And when I think of righteousness, I think it's definitely black and white. I feel like there's not a lot of gray area
Mm,
when we're thinking about righteousness. It's either you're right or you're wrong.
that's kind of where I was going to when I was thinking about the word. It's one of the words actually when I think about decolonization. I think of this word because I think of righteousness is a moral law that is kind of inspired by fundamentalism, that it's either good or it's evil. It's sin or it's not. Like what you're saying, it's black and white, and it's defined by this moral law that, and there's an assumption that everyone has this same moral code, right? So it's an assumption of kind of an authoritarian view of right and wrong. Yeah, it's and I like what you said, it's external. So it's this external kind of pressure of like what sin and what good is. It's judgy as all get out. Like it feels judgy.
Super judgy. Yeah.
Judgy. Yeah. Righteousness is judgy. So it's super judgy. Okay, that's how we define righteousness. And I encourage anyone out there to put in a comment or whatever as you watch this video and think about what is righteousness anyway. And yeah, is it judgy or what? Let's go on to the next question and see where we go with this. Okay, next question. Andrea, what feelings come to you when you think about being righteous?
So I think the feelings that come to me, based on sort of our definition of sort of black and white, that there's no gray area, there's no flexibility in thought. So to me, righteousness is feelings of almost confinement. It's restriction in thinking. It's very rigid. It almost
Mm.
feels like a superiority, almost omnipotent way of feeling, and like I said, this superiority feelings
Mm.
where it's sort of my way or the highway. I get all the power because I know definitively that I'm right based on this external sense of judgy morals.
Exactly. So I like what you said. It brought up something so important like that rigidity, inflexibility. I'm right. Right. And when earlier in an interview I did here on our channel, you could check out the conversation with Dr. George Holden. And he's written some parenting textbook. He's a professor and done a ton of research and very published, and also the president of the US Alliance to End Hitting Kids. Just a complete hero in the world of ending corporal punishment. And I interviewed him, and one of his books is called Dynamic Parenting. And I don't know the whole title, but it is about being a dynamic parent. And I asked him, and I read a lot, and I was like, what does he mean by this word dynamic? And it was so much about the opposite of righteousness. It was about flexibility, always learning, right? It's about going with that internal compass of recognizing the relationship comes first. So being dynamic, I think that's huge. And when I think of righteousness, the feelings that come up is like stiff, immovable. And when I think about kids that get that way too, like kids can be, and they dig their heels in. You can almost see it like in their physical self. So the feelings that come up is closed, not collaborative, unwilling to move. Are those feelings though? Those aren't feeling words.
I think they can be.
Yeah. What is a feeling?
I mean, it's hard because I feel like I mean, I guess there are like feelings and emotions, like
Mhm.
immobility, I feel like can be a
Ah,
feeling,
that makes sense. Yeah, feeling, I think is there a sense of
I think constraint is also a type of
constraint?
feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. I also feel like anger. Like when I think of being righteous, there's a sense of anger and hate underneath that for me. It's not a open, loving, relaxed feeling, it's anger. Do you get a sense like that at all?
Um, yeah, and I think it can be linked to this feeling of superiority.
Mm.
It's arrogant.
Arrogant. I love it. Yeah. Like arrogant. Yeah. So
Yeah,
judging,
and
arrogant.
arrogant, I think can run the risk of being aggressive
Yeah,
when
for
you're
sure.
when you're it's I think it's in that zone of red feelings, arrogance, aggression, you know.
For sure. For sure. Awesome. I think this is a really good question to think about, and I should have thought about it more like feeling words. We need a little feeling wheel here off to the side to make sure we're actually answering that question because I asked righteousness makes me feel tired. Well, that's what it does. Okay, next question.
Exhausting, right?
Exhausted. Yeah. Yeah. It's not energetic at all. Okay. Next question. How might a child feel when righteous morals lead them?
See, this is interesting because I think that when it comes to children, I think that they are learning through our values system. So children, when parents are preaching righteous morals, I think that and we're doing it with our fully formed adult brain. And I think when we project the righteous feelings onto children, they almost can they more easily can misinterpret sort of the moral justification behind why we feel righteous. If we're going to go the route of where it comes from a good intention, if we're going to think about, what I mean. So I think when a parent is righteous and it's coming from a place of good intentions, I don't know if children can really grasp that. And I think that they can easily turn it into um, a misuse of power, which
Mm,
parents can too. Absolutely. But I think with children, things are definitely more black and white. Until they have their development and can start to think philosophically about things abstractly. So I think they very much live in the here and now, and I think that with these with with ideas of righteousness, I think that they can more easily use it a misuse of power. I think
mhm.
it can encourage feeling better than others. I'm better than you because I believe in this thing that is said to be the right way to live. And
Mhm.
I think in addition to those um, where those that can lead children, I think it can also cause shame in children when they behave in ways that don't meet those expectations
Mhm.
that their parents have set forth. And I think that can be, you know, equally damaging to their sense of self and worthiness.
100%. I love that you brought up shame, right? So, because it's that idea for me of going back to righteousness is about a judgment of good and evil, right? So if I'm imposing a judgment on bad behavior, right, and I'm a child and I don't have the big context of the world and see the world as a beautiful place, and my behavior when a parent is being righteous and they know best, then my decision must have been wrong, but they don't think about it as their decision. They think about it as I'm wrong, I'm bad, and it's internalized. And I think what you said is really important because if they're giving this message of an abuse of power, that's how they go out in the world, right? So I believe this thing where it's like bullies have bullies, right? Even though parents might believe that they're sending some big important moral code to their child because they're righteous and, you know, I also want to go back a little bit because when I was reading about this too, righteousness is actually giving up your rights in the view of God, right? So that's kind of where the word comes from historically, is saying that it's not about my rights, it's about what does God think is right. So it's literally giving up your sense of rights. Like you hold rights, your inherent rights, your fundamental rights in the view of what God thinks is right. If you have a view that's fundamentally on the far extreme, then your God could definitely lead in a way that would infringe upon rights. And so as a child, to get all of this, super confusing, not feeling kind, so they can go out into the playground unkind, judgy, and abusing power and not forming these more caring and warm relationships. So I feel like a child would be disempowered and scared. It's kind of scary.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what I think what's interesting too, like for me, I think when I think of righteousness, I definitely, for me, I do think of sort of religious sort of background and God. And again, it's this external, you know, the 10 commandments, it's this external right or wrong
Mm-hmm.
kind of living. And I think, you know, the other thing I think, which is tricky, is that, you know, it's humans who wrote the Bible. You know, it came from God, but it's humans who wrote the Bible, and it's humans who interpret the
Mm-hmm.
Bible. And so it's really easy to say these are the black and white morals of God, but at the end of the day, it's being interpreted by, you know, imperfect beings, which we
Mm-hmm.
are. You know, for me, you know, I mean, and this is kind of a bit of a tangent to righteousness, but when I think about, you know, how I'm living my life, I think a better word that comes to mind is integrity. You know, I think
Mm.
they're very similar in terms of, you know, you're being guided by strong morals. But for me, having integrity is definitely more of an internal guidepost. And it's definitely more of something that's driven through, you know, science and research, and takes into account, you know, infallibility and our imperfections and that gray area. You know, it allows the mind to consider, you know, philosophical arguments like utilitarianism. So in, you know, God's law, it's thou shalt not kill, but you know what, there's room for killing people, one, when it's in self-defense. You know, there's your gray area right there. It's not black and it's not white. And then there's also the greater good, doing
Big
something
time.
moral, but it's for the greater good. And so I think these kinds of philosophical, um, more like morals, you know, like I think that integrity can take into more of these considerations, these moral considerations, and it's not so rigid.
Mm.
Um,
Absolutely. It's important that you're talking about that, right? Because interpretation is everything of scripture, and that's important to recognize, right? So righteousness to me sets on the more extremist interpretations for sure. And how you interpret, like what God you follow. Like, is it an all loving God who respects children's rights, or is it an all loving God who, you know, respects property law and men? Right. So like really assessing like that interpretation, I think is really important. I love that you mentioned integrity because that's a sense of self, and beyond what religion and what you have, is it the right thing to do to use and abuse your power like that?
that's right.
You
And so,
know?
and then integrity for me too, like I said, it takes into account, you know, science and research. And like I feel as a species, you know, we almost define ourselves by the scientific method, and using that to come to know and understand the world we live in. And so I think when we're using the, you know, the subjective guidepost of the olden days of yore, you know,
Pre-enlightenment.
right,
Yeah.
it totally negates science and research. And I mean, this is totally a tangent, but just to come back to like our purpose and our repeal, like the science is so clear when it comes to like positive behavior guidance,
Mm-hmm.
and how we don't have to shame and blame and punish children because they're not
Mm-hmm.
adhering to these moral standards that we think are these external moral standards, so I don't
And
know.
even to take it even further, like, yeah, we might be defining ourselves for science now, but there's a lot that could say that even those methods are very paternalistic, right? There's a lot of ways of knowing that we need to open up our minds to, that even take steps further away from, Eurocentric and Western views and methodologies of knowing. So if we go back, it's always righteousness back in the dawn of time, over pastoral laws and the Enlightenment and all of that, to where we are now. We've been focusing so much on the scientific method, and that builds on truth through data and experiment. And now through the scientific method, we're recognizing that that's not just the all way, no one way, that there's all kinds of different ways of knowing that we need to bring more into our lives and empower our children with. So it's so interesting to think about how righteousness is rigid and it's stuck, and yet what comes up for me when I think about that is it's so sad, because it's also closing our minds to just this beautiful world of learning and building on what we know. And when we have an open mind like that, we can show our kids the wonders and awe. And it's exciting, right? So it's actually fun to open up beyond and be more flexible.
Yeah, I
But
think you really hit the nail on the head there with closed-mindedness. I think righteousness is very close-minded. It doesn't. There's no room
no,
for
I
I
agree.
call it the gray area, but
I think the gray area is a good one. How about this one? Because I think this is a good question that leads kind of where we were talking about. So, in what ways do parents' values influence their righteousness? So, what I was going with this is, so what sort of values, who's parents who's righteous, what sort of values might they be instilling on their kids? Like for me, obedience. That came to mind.
yeah. See, for me, when I was thinking about this question, what values influence righteousness? Where my brain was at when I was thinking about this question is, and not so much what values influence righteousness, so much as how or not, it doesn't even have to be parental shame, but just shame in general influences righteousness. So when I feel shame, it's almost a catalyst to preach even harder
Right.
my morals and righteousness. But really it comes from a deeper rooted feeling of shame, where I'm not comfortable in my own skin, and maybe I did do something that was not okay, and I've buried it and I've tucked it away and I don't talk about it, and instead what I'm projecting is that arrogant I'm righteous
You got it.
because these are my external values. And I think shame can be a real influencer
Mm-hmm.
of righteousness.
You just really opened up something for me I wasn't even thinking about. In thinking about when you don't have options, right? If you're rigid as a parent, it's your way. It's the right way. It's good or it's bad, or it's good or it's sin, right? And so you don't have to explore other strategies in your parenting practice, right? It's this way. It's always been this traditional way. So why would we change it? And it's so unfortunate, because parenting toolboxes can be loaded with strategies for all kinds of things: how to help kids cooperate and share and take turns, accept no, brush their teeth, take initiative in routines. There's so many beautiful strategies that parents can practice. However, if you're righteous, if that's what, it's going to be really difficult to ask for help. And it's going to be really difficult to not just ask for help, but to accept change and reflect on your behavior, because that's the shame that holds you in place, right?
Absolutely. And I think one of the other, you just thought, made me think of something else too. I think righteousness is also it hinges on behavior.
Totally.
And what I'm learning through my early childcare education studies is that it has, like, behavior is the consequence of unmet needs. And so it's about, as a parent, getting what are those unmet needs? What are the stressors that are causing this behavior? Where righteousness is closed minded in that sense that it only addresses behavior because you did something bad, and let's talk about that bad thing.
100%. And it is so important you recognize that, right? Because we know, you read all the parenting research, and I love parenting. If those who know me, I actually really love it. Like, I'm obsessed. So I work with parents. I do parenting. That's all I do is talk about parenting. And one of the things that I think is really fascinating that shows up when it looks at effective interventions or parenting strategies, there's two words that I see a lot, and it's warmth and responsiveness. So warmth, that's about like showing love. That's about softening your presence and how you walk around your home, your tone of voice, your proximity. It's all of these ways to warm up your relationship so it's soft, so you're a soft place to land. And being responsive is being able to read your child, like what you're saying. How can I respond to their emotional needs right now? How can I support what's happening instead of being a catalyst, of judgment and, rigidity and confusion? So warmth and responsiveness do not align well with righteousness at all, at all.
No, you can't, especially if you think about how we're defining and understanding righteousness as, arrogance, on running the fine line of being aggressive,
Like,
superiority.
like
You know,
bully almost. Yeah.
that is the antithesis of warm, responsive care.
It's authoritarian, 100%. It's on the spectrum of authoritarianism and abuse of power. And I like last week, or I think next week, we're going to talk about childism. That's going to be the topic. And I know you're going to love it, but we're going to talk about it because you love it and I love it. But yeah, so it's not about respecting children, and it's 100% authoritarianism. Yeah. Awesome conversation. Okay, where are we going? Here, what's the next one? How about you read this one?
You have to read it because I can't find my
Okay.
notes.
How can being a righteous parent infringe on children's rights?
Okay, that's right. That's right. I have them now. How can a righteous parent infringe on a children's rights? I think that when I think about, because again, I think righteousness, I really believe that it comes from a place of good intentions. And I think it's always come from a place of good intentions, and I think this goes back to this idea, in our work, is that we need to be compassionate for parents who are maybe on the righteous side and on the rigid side. So I think for me, when I'm thinking about infringing on a children's rights and righteousness, I think it's just the slippery slope that comes from what righteousness is and means. And so
Mhm.
what I mean by this is, I think, I know children understand right and wrong from a very early age. They did an experiment with babies and puppets, and they had a puppet rolling up a boulder up a hill, and they had a bad puppet pushing the boulder down, and the babies always wanted to play with the puppet pushing the boulder up. They never wanted to play, and in fact they didn't like the puppet that was pushing the boulder
Mm.
down. So this shows that babies do kind of have this sense of that person wasn't good, and that was the good person. That's who they want to go to. So and I think that because from an early age we do understand that these ideas of right and wrong. And so I think with parenting, because children do show this, that it's a lot easier to shame and blame and punish them when they're not living up to those expectations. And I think when we go that route of shaming and blaming and punishment, we can tend to seriously infringe on our children's right of
Mhm.
security of person, being subjugated to degrading punishments. And the purpose is, again, it's just for that immediate behavior correction. So this is what I think of when I'm thinking about it's a slippery slope. It comes from a place
Mhm.
of good intention, but the outcome can be very harmful to their development, and it infringes on just their security and degrading behavior. Because a lot of punishments, like I'm thinking about when I was punished too, like it definitely ran the degrading line, you
Mhm.
know and that's no human should feel this way.
So, makes me sad, little Andrea.
I
And
know.
It's so important, like what you're talking about, I think too, is the idea of when a parent is righteous, that the risk of escalation is really high, right? Because children, like you said, are naturally drawn to warmth. They're naturally drawn and feel safe when the parent is responsive. So when a parent is rigid and righteous, the child has nowhere to go. And eventually, I think they do, well, they do, they develop, threats. They feel like there's a threat. And when children feel like when anyone feels like they're in a threat, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? Defiance, right? Which increases that cycle of the child misbehaving and not listening. And then it becomes focused on the behavior because the child actually learns this is the narrative between me and my parent. This kind of heightened, intense, and conflict actually is how we're close. And so then the parent is reinforcing through this connection of conflict, this kind of, you know, in quote, 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 disobedience, right? And that is really important because rigidity is not a soft place to fall. It's not a safe place to collaborate and solve problems. And it increases the likelihood of conflict escalation, which puts kids at huge risk, right? So then the parent has to use some form of discipline or, I mean, punishment. And then that doesn't work all the time. So they have to escalate it. It gets worse and it gets worse over time. This is such a story of physical punishment and abuse, right? So it begins with the parent maybe having good intentions. They don't have a good toolbox. It's not full, right? This is how they were raised. This is our moral law, right? Judge bad behavior. And so, no, right? And it just becomes this cycle of escalation leading to abuse or violence or violent abuse, right? So I think that's really, really important because children have a right to feel safe. They also have a right to self determination. They have a right to participate in decisions that affect them. They have a ton, 41 rights, 47, I always forget, under the articles. I should know that. And I will put in the comments a link to the Convention for Children's Rights in the link so parents can have a look because it is parents' obligation to teach children their rights. And when I had kids, my kids are 30 and 26, I didn't know much about children's rights. And I sure wish that when they learn to talk and walk, that this was something that was on our fridge, right? Because it really does call out parents when you see how many rights their children actually have and how easily our behavior infringes upon their right to dignity, even. So that's so important to recognize. So being a righteous parent infringes on all the children's rights because children just have a right to be safe. And righteousness is like we said, judgy, and it's kind of bullying.
It
And I
is,
don't mind saying
yes,
that.
it is bullying.
It is bullying. Okay, here we go. How does empowering children's rights help them cooperate and keep them safe?
Hmm. Uh, to me, when when children are empowered in understanding their rights, and we're giving them the tools to stand up for themselves and for others, they gain a greater sense of belonging in their
Mm,
community, in the home, in their world. And then when they have that sense of belonging and that connection to the world, then children do things because they're a part of the whole. They're a part of the large community and society, and they do things because they're the right things to do, not because of fear and other external
mhm.
forces. So for me, cooperation all comes down to belonging and connection. And when
100%.
we punish and threaten and shame and blame, we are severing their connection to us. And it is through us that they come to know the world.
Mm, so powerful. Exactly what I was thinking. Like we're on the same page. When we empower children's rights, we help them understand their belonging in the big biosphere of this planet, full of all living things. So, where their place in the world, in our home, in their relationships with their friends, in their community and school, in their town, in their country, in their world, and how they are also a part of the world of animals and plants and all of those things. So enlisting them as guardians of themselves on this planet, so because they do belong, they have such important messages to share, and wisdom and knowledge inherently. And so when we empower them and with their rights, we give them opportunities to speak up when things are out of place in the biosphere, when things are not right. They're empowered and they have the skill and the knowledge to collaborate and put things back and to solve problems. And they feel safe to um, to be a part of that rebel alliance, right? To really get on board with their responsibility as a citizen and of the planet. So I think like it's such a big picture, and it leads me to the last question. And what would change in society if children's rights were respected?
So for this one, I just had a really sort of little bow, this neat little bow sort of sentence to answer this question, which is, for me, when we respect children's rights, it's the domino effect. Then they grow up to respect each other, which leads to just a more equitable and just world.
You're right. That is beautiful. When we respect children's rights, we put them where they belong in society, which is a powerful place. And we hold them and cherish their opportunity to be a part of the world as it is and as it might be in the future. And so it's up to us to do that. So, yes, I love that you said respecting children's rights is a message of peace and justice. And yeah, thank you, Andrea. This was a really great conversation.
It's good. It's good stuff.
Good.
Righteousness. It's funny because I never even really thought about righteousness. Because I'm a non-religious person.
Mm-hmm.
And I've definitely, Albert Camus is like one of my biggest philosophers. And so I've always leaned towards moral integrity. And so having this conversation and really putting a lot of thought into what is righteousness, especially in terms of parenting, it really sort of broadened my sphere, and also like that compassion that we're looking for, because I do believe it comes from a place of good intentions. The path to hell is paved with good intentions.
Oh, and Canada's veil of good intention, right? So we live under this veil of good intention, and here we are unpacking that together. I love that. That's really great. I also want to tell everybody out there that Andrea, it's this way, Andrea is on TikTok, and I just went to your TikTok page and I saw a couple where you're getting quite like hundreds of views now. So I was like, look at Andrea go, making all these TikToks. You've been busy. I want everybody out there in the whole world actually to follow Andrea, because I know that her message is to respect children's rights and to get this repeal answered. So Andrea is a part of our alliance to ensure that children have their rights respected and enshrined in legislation. So thank you for all of that, Andrea. And I'm just so inspired by all of your energy. And thank you, everybody. Next week, we're going to talk about childism. Please do leave a comment. I don't think we had any viewers, but we'll keep on keeping on. It's been really fun. Repeal 43 in 2023. Right, Andrea?
Repeal 43, baby, 2023. This is our year.
This is our year.